Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Quarantine Report. Now today we're going to be talking about something slightly different, and that has been in response to the pulling down of the statue of Edward Colston in Bristol. That is why we must protect our history, not destroy it. What first must be understood before we talk about anything is that you cannot judge the past by the standards of the present. What used to go on and what may have gone before, whilst may not be acceptable now, often had a context or a rationale at the time. For those of you who don't know, a mob of activists in the British city of Bristol have pulled down a statue of a 17th century merchant and slave trader named Edward Colston. Now, let's go into Edward Colston's background. Whilst he was a slave trader, what must be understood that at the time of his practice, so 1680 is when he began in earnest with the Royal Africa Company, slavery was both legally and morally acceptable. The abolitionist movement, which abolished slavery, had not begun in earnest yet. William Wilberforce, who is one of the most famous anti-slavery politicians, hadn't even been born yet. Colston was not only a slave trader, but he did a great deal for the city of Bristol. He founded schools, hospitals, and other houses for the poor. Many of these institutions last this very day and benefit people both past and present. Although a slave trader, had Colston gone to Africa at the time, he would have been a completely uncontroversial character. Many Africans themselves took part in the slave trade and were enthusiastic about capturing fellow Africans and selling them to increase their own wealth and power. Whilst morally abhorrent to us in the 21st century, it must be remembered for almost all of human history, slavery in one form or another has been present. And it's only been in the 20th and 21st century that it's almost been completely eradicated, at least officially. This is in spite of the fact that millions of slaves are still around today in a very lucrative black market. Many have tried to argue that it serves the cause of anti-racism to get rid of his statue because it may upset black people living in Britain and make them question their place in the country. However, this isn't true. British history is replete with people who have done bad things to certain minorities or certain groups of people. Take Edward I. There's a statue of him in the centre of London. He was responsible for the expulsion of the Jews. They were gone from England for almost 300 years because of what he did. Yet the presence of his statue has not caused any Jewish person any harm in any way. The same goes for Catholics. Elizabeth I was the arch persecutor of Catholics. She burned many of them at the stake and drove many of them underground. Yet there are statues of her all over the country. She's considered one of our great queens. Catholics today, in their daily lives and in their hopes and dreams for the future, are not affected by statues of Elizabeth I, if they even know that the statues exist. Perhaps the most famous statue in the world, the sculpture of David by Michelangelo, considered to be one of the greatest masterpieces ever produced. King David himself was a slave owner. He was also a man who murdered the husband of the woman who he loved. However, this does not mean we remove this great masterpiece because he doesn't conform to our current standards of morality. Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, other people great figures in history, were imperfect people. They owned slaves, they conquered, they massacred. Yet this is all part of history. It's not something we can erase. These statues belong to all of us. They are a part of our history for better or worse. And giving in to the demands of a lynch mob who go after them because they don't conform to their idea of what is right is classic authoritarian, even terrorist tactics. ISIS, for example, destroyed any statue or historical work that didn't conform to their view of the world. So did the Taliban when they destroyed the great statue of Buddha in Afghanistan. The great figures of our history must be protected, contextualised and understood. Their existence in our public space should not be subject to mob violence or the whims of the present. By allowing this lynch mob to take down the statue, we are feeding a hungry crocodile. It's not going to be satisfied, it's going to come back for more. All our history is in danger if we don't stand up to this. Thank you for tuning into this special edition of the Quarantine Report. The regular episode will be back soon. Remember to like, subscribe, and any questions or comments will be welcome.